I'm Doug Fernan. This is my take on music recording. Major record labels and other music providers are committed to adopting Dolby Atmos and other immersive audio technologies. There is a huge amount of work available to remix a label's entire catalog in the new formats. Dale Becker of Becker Mastering in Los Angeles has become an expert on the practical aspects of Dolby Atmos. You may remember Dale from episode 16 last year. Dale is a sought-after mastering engineer with decades of experience. He masters many of the most important recordings of our time. In this new episode, Dale explains Dolby Atmos, the advantages to the music listener, his experience in starting from zero and learning all he could about the format, and he explains how the new immersive audio formats are changing our job. Dale explains the basics of Atmos and the challenges and rewards of setting up a control room for the format. He also gives us insight on how we might change our recording habits with Atmos in mind. I started by asking Dale to explain in practical terms what Atmos is and how it benefits the listener.
Yeah, Atmos is really an exciting new thing. It also goes by under the guise of immersive audio or spatial audio, depending on who you're talking to and where you're listening. But the big takeaways for me is the return of dynamics. So with Dolby Atmos, there is a minus 18 LUFS loudness maximum standard, which means that we no longer have to crush our music because there's no point anymore. Not to mention having the ability to pan things around and not to just jam everything out through two speakers, along with the dedicated LFE channel, which can be really dynamic as well. You just have a very different playing field from our standard stereo thing that we've been dealing with for many, many decades. And especially the past few, probably 3 decades, just as music got louder and louder, we just have kind of pushed ourselves into a corner where we have, in one way, we've made the most of stereo. We've been able to kind of dominate digital recording and make it do what we want. We've kind of maximized what we can do there. And that's why I think Atmos is so timely, coming in such a time as this, is that it provides us with a next step for audio, and it provides us with such a broader palette, as I mentioned, in terms of dynamics, in terms of panning, in terms of, that word immersive, the level of immersion for the listeners, especially, in situations where you want to feel really not just surrounded by music, but close to the performer, close to the vocalists. It's the level of intimacy and of connection with the music, especially in a good listening environment, is unparalleled. And stereo just doesn't have that level of connection. I mean, when you are sitting in an Atmos room and you are listening to a vocalist, it's like they're right there in front of you and not just kind of smashed in with a bunch of music. It's really exciting.
What is it that makes that much more intimate?
Well, in like a typical Atmos room, you will have a left, center, right configuration. You're going to have ceiling speakers and you're going to have surround speakers, and then you have your LFE or sub channel. And just having the dedicated center channel for me is a huge win when it comes to vocalists. I mean, you don't always need to put the vocalist in the center. You can do whatever you want in Atmos, but the live performances that I've heard where the vocalist is coming out of the center of the channel, it's like they're singing right in front of you, as opposed to, we're used to this kind of phantom center, with the left-right speakers, but to actually have a point from where the sound is coming from in the center and the body of the vocal coming from an actual center channel is just a very different experience than when we experience something in the center from a stereo field.
Yeah, I actually have some experience from long, long ago with that because I did some sessions at Bell Sound in New York, and they hadn't really changed much since maybe 1960. And that they had a left, right, and center. And there were no pan pots on the console. You just assigned it left, right, or center.
I love it.
I mean, you could put stuff in between just by using multiple mics and so on, but there were no pan pots. And you're right, the vocals were just so solidly right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never forgot that. It was a pretty amazing experience.
Yeah, it's just a different feeling. And although and we can get into this more later, I know most consumers are going to be listening in a pair of headphones, on the go. But that center channel and those spatial representations that occur in these new headphones that are coming out, it really represents that center channel well. It really translates like it does in the room. So even in situations where we aren't listening in a speaker environment, just having that point and that space is really fantastic, even for consumer systems.
So you can actually make that solid center channel on a pair of headphones.
Yeah, especially on the new ones that are coming out. I mean, the headphone technology, it's definitely in process where the whole Atmos workflow, getting it recorded, getting it mixed, getting it mastered, getting it out to the public, that's all kind of fine-tuned and ready to go. And now it's up to these manufacturers such as like Apple's come out with their Atmos headphones. I'm sure, every headphone company, whether it be Beats, all these different manufacturers are really going to be competing for taking the headphone technology to the next level. And really the conversation is going to be what headphone company represents Atmos or immersive the best. So I'm really looking forward to that competition. I hear in the future, hopefully you'll be able to go to Best Buy. They'll be able to take a map of your ear and actually configure the headphone and adapt the headphone to your particular hearing, to even take the spatial representations that your ear is hearing to the next level, like fine-tuning the headphone for a person's particular ear. All these new kind of innovative things are just going to make the spatial representations just get better and better as people compete to make their products better and better.
That's really cool. What really appeals to me is that loudness standard.
Oh yeah.
Because for several years now, since you could have a decent metering of your loudness level, even though I don't think any of them are perfect, but it does give you a pretty good sense. I've standardized on -16 for music and -18 for the podcast. And I just make sure everything meets those standards. So, and it just sounds so much better. The listener might have to crank it up higher than they're used to, but it sounds better.
Yeah, it really does. And every time I do an Atmos master or I'm helping someone do an Atmos mix, we always have the approved stereo master in the session ready to reference. And number one, you want to make sure the Atmos is beating the stereo. The Atmos should sound better than the stereo because it's not totally smashed with limiters. And it's just got the spatial element too. But when we really dial in a Atmos mix, and then we're going back and forth between the -18 Atmos master and the maybe the stereo mix was at -7. The amount of crunch on vocals and kick drums and just things being smashed together, once you experience that difference, it definitely sells the format, because it's just the AB is it's wild. It really is wild. And it makes you wonder, like even in cases where I did the stereo master, it makes you wonder how we've grown so accustomed to this sound, this truly distorted and spaceless sound, how we've grown accustomed to it. Because when I was working on the stereo master. I worked hard on it when I was going in and really trying to make it sound as great as possible. And then you step away and you're working on the Atmos version and you go back and listen. You're like, man, that really, no matter how hard I tried, -7, -8, -9, it's always going to have that appearance of distortion and have that kind of square transient feel, as opposed to these in Atmos, because kick drums don't necessarily have to be limited and things don't have to be compressed together. It's just you have the experience of all these different types of transients. Like you can make something sound like a square wave if you want it to, but the difference in transients, you have these kick drums with these really pillowy transients with releases that release differently in different places than where the transient was. The first thing we listened to on our Atmos system when we installed it was Rocket Man. The panning in Rocket Man on that Atmos mix, in the sides, it's the I think it's 12-string guitars kind of in the sides, and you hear the pick on the strings. You can feel the transients, like the transients of the strumming is like translating through the speaker in a way that you just don't get when things are so compressed. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah, well, I think another factor there, too, is that it's fatiguing to listen to that stuff that's so squashed.
Oh, yeah.
And I think people, a lot of times they really like a song, but they don't go back and listen to it over and over again because it's just not pleasant. Mm-hmm. And I suspect if we can solve that problem, people will go back to listening to things over and over again like we used to.
Yeah. Piggybacking off that note, a lot of the reasons why in years past things like surround sound and hi-fi audio didn't catch on is because people want to take music with them. So it was always the Walkman and the pair of headphones or the iPod or all these different iterations of portable music. And that's what really sold me on Atmos, is this is the first hi-fi dynamic and immersive or surround version of music that consumers, that me and you, we can take with us and experience wherever we are, whether it be on Apple EarPods, or AirPods, my apologies, AirPods on a train, or pretty soon cars are going to be, there is Atmos in cars, but pretty soon that's going to become more the standard. We'll be able to experience this wherever we go. And I think that's why surround and DSD and all these things have died in years past, is because no one wants to sit in the middle of 6 speakers in a sweet spot and just sit there listening to music anymore. Or at least that's not the experience most people will want to have. And so that's what sold me. I was like, this is definitely going to take off because this is something people can experience it anywhere and everywhere.
I think that's really an important point because I have no idea what the statistics are, but my perception, just from talking to consumers, friends that are listeners, is that almost all their music is consumed with either headphones or some sort of earbuds,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You don't have people in their living room with speakers sitting down there to listen. I'm sure there's still lots of people that do that, but
yeah,
it's not as pervasive as it used to be. I go back to the days when quad was the up-and-coming new format, and it was pretty cool. It was actually pretty nice for tracking because you could put whatever it was that you were working on. Say you were doing a vocal, you could put that up front and put everything else or most of everything else in back of you, which really focused you on what you were working on. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, I didn't see much value in it. It was just kind of gimmicky. But it sounds like if they can do this with, headphones and earbuds, that's a breakthrough.
Yep, absolutely. And another wonderful point about it is that in a lot of cases where people will have speaker systems set up, it's a real experience to walk around a room when there is an Atmos mix playing. Say you walk out of the listening position and you go to grab an espresso and you walk past the rear channel of that Rocket Man song, you're like literally next to the acoustic guitar. It's almost like you've soloed or you've turned up the acoustic 12 dB and you're just like listening to that, and you walk over to another point in the room and you're next to some octave background vocals. It's really cool to be able to walk around a location and experience different parts of the mix. You will never get that with stereo, because it's like you just have two speakers and audio is coming out and the balances are the balance. But to be able to walk around a room and kind of discover new parts of the mix that you never heard before, background vocals, like I said, that you had, that were so far down in the mix you never really noticed, and all this value and all of this artistry, is just kind of bubbling out of the music. I love it.
Yeah, I'm sure that would appeal to a lot of people. For me, it's kind of disturbing to think that no matter how I mix it, it's all going to be dependent on where somebody is in the room. But
yeah.
But, if people perceive value in that, I think it's great. I've heard Atmos demos. I think it was the PMC had a demo room a couple times recently at shows.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not real recently, but, a couple years ago. And I thought it was pretty impressive sounding. But I also felt it was disturbing that the mix was only the real mix in one position.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's from an engineer's perspective who's been listening for 50 years and wants the balance to be what I think it should be.
When Dolby came and tuned my room, because they have a particular tuning, they tune it so that the sweet spot's about, I think it was about like a 6 to 8 foot circle kind of in the middle of the room. And you really have to venture back like to where my couch is for the LCR to kind of start losing dominance and to kind of get lost in the surrounds. Say, for instance, in the headphones, like in your typical consumer listening environment, you're always in the sweet spot there, right? So I guess that's particular to those sorts of situations, would be particular to walking around in a room. But just the novelty of being able to experience these different perspectives it's a really fun thing.
Do you have any idea what the market penetration of this is at this point at the consumer level?
The labels, it is full on everything that comes in that's going out. There's going to be a stereo version. There's going to be an immersive version. I mean, that's as far as I know from the label side of things. They are putting out content at a frenzied pace. I mean, and the engineers are like, oh gosh, it's like, this is so much, but we're along for the ride. We're down for it. So the labels are definitely putting out the content and are finally going full bore. We're doing this. We're going to make it available. That comes with some upsides and downsides, because when you're trying to put out a lot of content, you're not going to have days on end to perfect mixes and to really go the extra mile on everything you're putting out. So that is something that I've kind of been keeping my eye on with people. But in terms of market saturation, that's really going to increase as content is available, as people hear about it more and are excited about the opportunity to consume music like this. Really, it comes down to the manufacturers making things that consumers want to buy, like the AirPod Pros, or like Sonos has a wonderful sound bar that you can experience Atmos through their new sound bar. And then other kind of even more novel, like full home systems and stuff. These things are coming, and I think as more products are available and as they get better and better, Atmos and immersive will just become that much more an everyday experience for people.
As far as you know, are the labels going to reissue all their everything they've done in the catalog in Atmos eventually?
Yes, that is already in full effect. I can't tell you how many mix engineers I know who have worked with one particular artist or another, and basically everyone's in a mad rush to bring all their old catalog up and put it in Atmos. And so there's a lot of work to do. There really is.
Well, that's a great opportunity for all the mixers out there. They'll never want for work.
Exactly. No, I mean, anyone who's set up right now to be able to do the work are busier, probably busier than ever. And there's a lot of guys I know who are getting set up right now as quickly as possible because they have months and months and months worth of work just waiting for them on top of their standard stereo stuff. And in a lot of cases, I've even heard of mixers not getting jobs because they were lined up to do the stereo work, but they can't or won't or don't want to do the Atmos mix. So I think it's going to be an important thing for mixers to be set up at least with a 7.1.4 system, if not something bigger, so that they can, meet these deliverable requirements of our current time.
Is there a steep learning curve for mixers to adapt to this?
Currently, and I've kind of learned by the school of hard knocks, but currently it is still pretty complicated. It's a multi-computer system that you have to have. You have to have it used to be 3 computers, and luckily now it's only 2. You can even do it on 1 if your computer's fast enough, which is kind of a more recent development. But the typical system is a Pro Tools system connected to an Avid Matrix, and the Avid Matrix spits out the mix via Dante, 128 channels of Dante, and goes over through a Dante network to what we call the renderer. And the renderer is a separate standalone machine in most cases that is running Dolby's software. And that, like in my case, I have a little Mac Mini in a Sonic case with a RedNet PCIe card. That's a Dante card. So it takes in the 128 channels of Dante, and it also takes in all the metadata of the object positions, the bed data, the binaural data, and that's where you record your master, so to speak. And at the same time of spitting out, the renderer spits out your Atmos mix, it's also spitting out what they call re-renders, and that will be like a 7.1 version of the mix and a 5.1 version of a mix and a 2.0 version of the mix, which would be standard stereo, and then a binaural stereo for headphones. So it's spitting out all these things at once so you can quickly go between the Atmos version, what it'll sound like if it's played back in a 7.1, what it'll sound like played back in a stereo environment, and what it'll sound like if someone's in a standard pair of non-Atmos headphones. Because that's one of the other cool things about Atmos is it could be played back anywhere. It doesn't need to specifically be a fully immersive 13-channel speaker system around the room. If you have 5 speakers, it can adapt to that. And that's one of the other cool things of it. But yeah, back to your question, it is pretty complicated still just because there's a lot of connections. It's not just all in one computer for the most part. So there's a lot to learn about Dante networks, and anytime you try to have 2 computers working together, they don't always want to. But for the most part, I was able to dive in. The way I got started was I went and watched the Dolby videos, which were really, really well done, kind of from a more of a technical kind of point of view. So they aren't like the most entertaining things in the world, but they get you the information. So I sat through the Dolby videos on their website and followed the instructions on how to connect Pro Tools to the renderer and how the I/O window needs to be. And they walk you through step by step, so you get to do it all yourself and understand the connections. And then once you have all the technical aspects of it kind of under the hood, you can then start to experiment with what it feels like to mix in Atmos. And that's kind of like the first big step is like, what does it feel like to have a vocal in the center channel? Or how do we create an Atmos mix that doesn't sound like disparate, disconnected elements in a room, but how do we glue music together like we like it to feel glued, like musicians in a room playing together? How do we make it feel like it's these elements connect and that there is natural presentation of these different objects. How do we do that? And that's something that is going to be really something that I'm looking forward to as skilled engineers start to take this technology and really make the most of it and really see what is possible. I'm really excited to see that. But it's a new thing. It's like one person told me it's like when we went from tape machines and we had analog sounding fantastic, and then the industry labels, artists kind of were like, Pro Tools, we got to start using Pro Tools because we can edit and we don't have to rewind tape. And then we had to kind of like dominate and make this new thing that we thought sounded so bad sound good. And I feel like we're kind of in that same thing where with Atmos, we have this new technology. It's not like we're going to have new things we got to learn and new things we really have to innovate. And innovation is always complex. So, it is complicated, but I have high hopes, especially for people who are passionate about music and passionate about the new format.
I think that they're probably, they're during this transition period, assuming that this, becomes the dominant format, there's still going to be a lot of people listening in traditional stereo. Mm-hmm. So do you find that when you do your optimum Atmos mix, whatever one of the multi-speaker formats, does that collapse down to stereo in a way that you find acceptable?
I do. The one thing is that, when we make our perfect Atmos mix, that Atmos mix is only perfect when it sounds great in those folded down states, when it sounds good in a stereo set of speakers, when it sounds good in the headphones. In my mind, the Atmos mix isn't finished until we have perfected the fold down as well. It's a matter of compromise. It's a matter of getting a mix that sounds great in full Atmos, but then going and spending an hour A/Bing between the original mix and the original stereo master and what the new stereo would be from the fold down of the Atmos. It always leads to new tweaks. In a lot of cases, like vocal levels won't be what you thought they were in the fold down, and you'll be like, man, the vocal feels really soft in the 2.0 or in the binaural render on the headphones. We better check that. And then you go back to the Atmos mix and you're like, oh yeah, the vocal is kind of soft. So the different fold downs, whether it be stereo or binaural or 7.1 or the Atmos mix, they're constantly informing one another. And it's kind of like referencing different material. When we reference things, it's constantly informing our ear of the shortcomings and potential things that we're missing in the main format. So that being all said, I think that even though it's difficult to find the balance between the 2.0 fold down and the full Atmos and the binaural, I think that as we adapt and as we innovate, as I mentioned, and as we push forward to take the new technology and make it what we need to be via new techniques and via even new technologies from plug-in companies and stuff, I think we can make that sound. I think it does sound great, but I think we can make it even sound better than where we currently are.
That's pretty exciting. I mean, it's a whole new technology to learn. I mean, not only from an equipment point of view, but just from an artistic point of view.
Oh, yeah.
But you're not intimidated by it. You're excited about it.
I'm excited about it. I mean, and I've mentioned this in a couple other places, but I'll say it here again. When I ordered all the gear, the company that sold it to me, RSP, they were super helpful. They're like, hey, can we send someone down to set it all up? And I was like, well, no, guys. I'm plugging this in, and I'll call you guys when I really need someone. And I eventually did call them, and they helped me on things that I really needed help on. But I wanted to know where all the connections were made, how it was all plugged in. I wanted to see under the hood, see how it worked, because I really wanted to understand it beyond just a Pro Tools screen. I wanted to understand where the signal was flowing, because ultimately I wanted to, at least in my mind, feel like I had the expertise to problem solve, to, when something's not working, why is it not working? I really wanted to understand the format and be able to also help others. Like, if I didn't plug it in all myself, the best thing that I could have done was, well, here's my text number. And I really wanted to be able to help people along the way as well. So definitely is not easy, but it's worthwhile, I think.
That's great. And, if I were to make that transition, I'd approach it the same way, because I definitely want to understand what was going on, because things are going to go wrong. Mm-hmm. And the more you understand the system, the quicker you'll be able to get back up and running.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Obviously, we don't want to be the guy everyone calls when they have a problem, but when close friends really need some help and they're able to call you and you have the answer, like, it's cool to be in that position, once in a while. Not every day.
Dale, these days, what is the percentage of your day that's spent mixing versus mastering?
Well, the terms mixing and mastering, especially as we push into this new spatial audio, the lines have been obscured a lot, and we're discovering what true Atmos mixing is and what true mastering will be, because a lot of Atmos mixes are made from stereo mixed stems. So the song is already mixed. When you pull the stems into a session and you press play and it's just coming out of your left and right channel, it sounds mixed. And so if I were to take those stems and I pan them around the room and I add some effects, am I really the Atmos mixing engineer? Like, some people would say yes, but to me, from a mastering point of view, that sounds a lot more like stem mastering. So because all I'm doing is taking things that, like when I work with Tony Maserati on some stuff and he sends me mixed stems and I start moving things around, I would never ever claim that was my mix. Those stems
Sure.
are always Tony's. Those are Tony's effects. Those are Tony's $1 million sounding vocal chain and vocal treatment. I'm not going to take credit for being the mixer, but some people would. I don't know. So in those cases, it's called mixing, but is it really? I don't know. But in other cases where people are working from a brand new production session that came into Atmos and everything is untreated and straight from the production stage, yeah, that will be what I would consider to be a true Atmos mix. But that's not where most stuff is happening. In most cases, it's stereo stems with effects that we're panning around and adapting to be immersive. And so I wouldn't say that I'm spending a lot of time mixing. I would say that I'm helping a lot of mixers fulfill a deliverable requirement. I am mastering that Atmos track. I would maybe consider it more of a stem mastering. But right now, in terms of how much work I'm doing in stereo, how much work I'm doing in Atmos, really the only way I've been able to do both is to do all my stereo work during the day and then to stay up late at night doing Atmos stuff. And so I've been kind of working around the clock, and it really is pretty much at this point 50-50, because I have my whole standard stereo stuff that I've been working on. I've been working to be busy for a long time, and I don't want that to go away, and then I've been doing the Atmos stuff at night when time allows.
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to have to come up with some new terminology for these different processes and who does them.
Absolutely. I mean, I was even thinking that I have people asking, well, what should we credit you as? Or when I work with a mixer on, and they come over and we work together, and I bring my expertise from more of the technical side and I do some mastering tweaks, but they did a lot of the kind of creative panning and level work on an Atmos mix. It's like, what do we credit ourselves as? It's going to be even weirder when we get to like award stage and, and if how people are credited and all that stuff, like there's a lot of work to do there, because, labels just see it as a deliverable, but we've kind of created quite a mess in terms of like how people interact creatively and what credit they are due. My personal take on it right now is I don't care. Like, let's just have fun. I don't care how I'm credited. I don't care if you call me mastering or mixer or whatever. Let's just have some fun. Not to mention that, like on Tidal right now, so they've implemented not only Atmos, but they've implemented Sony 360RA, which is Sony's competing format to Atmos. And when you click on the RA credits, it just shows whoever mastered the stereo. It doesn't even have separate credits for the different things. So I don't know what they're going to do, but we definitely have a lot of work to do in this area.
Yeah, it sounds like the awards are going to have to come up with some new categories.
Absolutely. Not only that, but I mean, right now, labels are just getting acquainted with the fact that Atmos and 360RA, these things can't be an afterthought. We're in this kind of odd space where we push so hard to get a stereo master done for an artist, from production to mixing, to mastering, to then mix more mix tweaks, and then you run a new master, and then a producer flies in a beat, and the mixer sends, we do all this thing, and we go back and forth for Improg 14, Improg 15, all these, versions, and we finally get a stereo master, and we deliver it at midnight on the day that it's due, and then everyone's like, okay, just send over the Atmos. And you're like, there is no Atmos. We need to get to a place where not only the crediting isn't an afterthought, but the whole process isn't an afterthought. There's tons of innovation to do there as well.
That leads me to another question I had for you, and that is, I think there's going to be a lot of people out there recording, either small studios, home studios, artists doing their own production and so on. What do they have to do, if anything, differently to make their recording Atmos compatible and Atmos optimized?
Well, first off, sample rates are a consideration. Atmos deliverables are always going to be 48K for the time being, although you can mix in 96K. So if you think you're going to be doing an Atmos, if Atmos is going to be your main release format, you want to record in those sample rates so that there isn't a lot of unnecessary conversion. Mm-hmm. I'm a stickler on sample rate conversion. People are really willy-nilly with their sample rate conversion. They'll move things, oh, it's 96K, let's go up there. Oh, now we got to mix it 40-for-1. Now we're going to upsample, downsample. And by the end of it, you just have this really weird sounding thing. I'm a huge proponent for recording at the release sample rate for Atmos. Like if you're going to do Atmos, it's got to be either 46 or 96K, so you don't have to have all these unnecessary conversions. And then as we're creating the production, we can have in mind what we want to do with these things as we start to enter the mix phase. So we don't want to be consolidating a lot of stuff together or down mixing a lot of things. We want to keep things as separate as possible so that, a lot of times people consolidate stacks of background vocals. Well, maybe you don't want to do that because maybe you want to spread those around the room. I don't know. As we're working, as we're developing the music, we want to understand, we want to have in mind what we want the placement to be like as we approach mixing. So it's really just a more forward thinking necessity in terms of production. Not to mention that in stereo we get away with murder in terms of sound quality when it comes to recording things that end up in a stereo format, because you can hide stuff in stereo. You can use a terrible recording, from a bedroom through an old 2001 inbox mic pre that's distorting and make it sound pretty good with the tools we have available. I mean, decent with the tools we have available today, but that's not going to fly in Atmos because everything's much more naked. Everything's much more exposed in Atmos. So if you have a really terrible sounding vocal recording, you can work really hard to do what you can, but it's never going to be as easy to kind of like cover over bad recording. So I think the biggest thing is that on the recording end, people really need to up their game. Even independent artists, maybe it's time to look for a new microphone. I mean, there are tons of great microphones under $1,000. Maybe we should set aside the $300 microphone and save up for the $800 microphone. Or maybe maybe we should look into a proper A to D converter instead of just using what you have. Like upgrading the sound quality of what we're recording is going to really pay off way more in dividends than it used to in stereo, because we're hearing more of the product of our recording expertise or lack thereof.
Yeah, it sounds like this would require everybody to step up their game and just provide cleaner recordings, which is, something I've been saying my whole lifetime.
Absolutely. And I know there are considerations. It does sounds kind of snooty for me to be sitting here going, up your game and recording, because people, sometimes they get offended, well, I can't afford that, or all the different reasons, or I don't need to do that, like different styles of music. It's fine, all these things. But I'm not trying to be snooty or trying to talk down to anyone. But what I would like to develop as a common thread in this industry is this idea of us all getting better and trying to get better and trying to do better, and not just be like, well, this is what I have and this is what I can do. Like we all are where we are. We all have what we have. We all are in the circumstances we find ourselves in. I just want to push for everyone who will listen to, like, let's be the best we can be. Let's continue to push forward to put out the best product, and not just be like, this is how it is and this is the status quo. Like, this $300 mic is fine. I just want to have a common thing with other engineers to where we're all pushing forward to do our best. If that makes any sense. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Well, it makes sense to me. I think, though, the thing that's going to limit that is that, and I know this is true even with some very successful people, they don't hear it. They don't hear that this could sound a whole lot better because it's got, a huge amount of distortion on it. Mm-hmm. And I think as you work your way down to, less experienced levels of engineers, unfortunately, that becomes the norm for them. It's supposed to sound that way. So it's a really difficult education problem to get people to do that. I'm trying to do that myself, but I'm just one person with a little podcast. But hopefully that message will get through to people and they'll make those changes they need to make.
Yeah, I think people have this idea. Certain people have this idea that if you can't hear it, it doesn't matter. And mm-hmm. the very reason that I have whatever measure you would attribute to my success, the very reason I have that is because I hear the things that people say you can't hear. And it's totally possible to hear these things. It's just a matter of working on your ears, working on your hearing, wanting to get better. If you start, like a college student, if you start with the premise that if I can't hear it, it doesn't matter, or that sample rates don't matter, or that MP3s are fine, or that this is fine, this is good enough. If you have that, it's a limiting belief, and your brain will never have the desire to hear past it, because you've already made the decision that this is not going to sound good, and it's going to take, I don't know, an act of God for you ever to hear the difference if you've already decided it doesn't matter or that it doesn't sound different. And I think in a lot of cases we have that when people are listening to different things. They're just, the difference doesn't immediately grab them, so it doesn't matter. But I will tell you this, if you start to dive in and you start to really want to hear differences, you really want to hear the nuance, you really want to make something as great as possible. I'll put it this way. One of the experiences that I had is I worked really hard with John Castelli on a project. And we worked for probably 3 weeks straight on this. I mean, I knew every nuance of this project, and I did everything I could to make the 44.1 wave master that I delivered just as great as possible. And I knew it so well that when the first time I pressed play on Spotify with the best settings I could, I was devastated devastated to the core, like I had done something wrong because of how bad it sounded on Spotify, because I was so in touch with the nuance of the wave file that I perceived how bad Spotify's playback was. And like I said, it devastated me, and I had to go back and double check that I didn't do something terrible, and I hadn't. It was just the sound of low quality streaming. It's the same thing when, people develop fine wine. I don't have a taste for fine wine. Like, a $7 bottle is fine for me, but people who really dive into fine wines, like the $7 bottle that I would drink, would be just disgusting, to someone who has spent the time and invested the effort in really discovering the nuances of wine. It's really about passion. It's like, if you're not passionate about audio, maybe consider doing something else. If you're not passionate enough about audio to dive into the nuance and to get past this notion that if you can't hear it immediately, it doesn't matter. If you don't have that desire, maybe this isn't your passion. And maybe this isn't what you should be doing. Find something that you can be passionate enough about to like really dive in and try to make it something you love, and make it something that you want to be. We've talked a lot about innovation. If you're not passionate enough about audio to want to be the innovator, maybe consider some other space in life that you would have that sort of drive. Because that's where you're going to find your success, is where you're passionate, where you want to innovate, where you want to drive things forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Dale. Those are really good points. You can develop those things if you care.
Yeah.
And so I think, just reiterating your point is, if you don't care, you're never going to develop those skills. I don't think it requires any kind of superhuman hearing or anything. It just means paying attention until you learn it.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't require, a lot of people enshrine the certain engineers, and they do have great ears. Yeah, they can hear. Some people say, "Oh, that guy could hear a fly fart on the wall." Like it's these dumb notions, and it's really just anyone can hear this stuff. It's just a matter of wanting to, and it's a matter of putting in the time. Just like working a muscle. Like, you're not going to get buff if you don't work out. If you want to get hearing buff, you got to do some listening. You got to work that muscle.
Right. Yeah. And it's like anything else. If you want to get good at it, make sure you listen to the best possible examples.
Absolutely. Because we don't like what is good. We like what we know. If we're just used to listening to MP3s, I will attest to this. There was a time when low-quality MP3s were the norm in terms of people reviewing mixes and reviewing masters. If the mixer had been sending MP3s to the client because of internet bandwidth at the time, and they were listening to low-quality MP3s of their music for weeks on end, and then it got to the mastering stage, and I sent them a 44.1 24-bit WAV file to listen, it would inevitably get me, they'd be like, well, what is this? This doesn't sound good. They've become used to the low quality. And then it was always this whole thing of like, oh, okay, well, I'll make you an MP3. And oh, yeah, this is what I'm used to. Like, people just like what they know and like what they're comfortable with. And when new sets, new resolution and new things, it makes people uncomfortable. Sometimes they just don't want to admit to themselves that they've been living with a lower something less than, that they could have been the whole time. But it's just, we have to get beyond this.
I suspect a certain amount of this new material that's being mixed in Atmos, for lack of a better term, is going to end up on people's phones as some sort of reduced bandwidth format, whether it's MP3 or something else. How do the Atmos mixes translate to that?
It depends on the phone, and it obviously a thousand different factors. In a perfect world, when the engineer has done their work, as I mentioned, really paying attention to the re-renders and the different versions that the Atmos renderer is spitting out, it should translate really, really well. And as technologies evolve, there is technology evolving that can take an Atmos mix and play it from a single point in the room, and it feels spatial to our ears via different whatever phase relationships or whatever technology they're working on. Now, obviously, this is all in the beginning stages, but I could imagine in 5 to 10 years of single point Atmos mixes being a thing. Having a small boombox in the room, or having a phone that can sound immersive just via new technology. So I definitely would say that it's evolving. I would say it could sound good. Does it always? No. But I think in those cases, it's more the case of maybe an Atmos mix getting rushed, or maybe the engineer not paying enough attention to the re-renders.
You've given us a lot to think about. One other question, going back to the person doing the original recording and maybe doing their stem mix that they're going to send to you or somebody else to mix. Does Atmos change what they would do as in terms of processing? I'm thinking specifically of compression.
A vocal can be extremely dynamic. And I don't think that working in Atmos gets completely away from the need to control dynamic content, because if you left a very dynamic vocal performance untreated, it would be kind of painful to listen to in Atmos, because you'd have to really turn down. You'd really have to turn up your speakers to hear soft passages, and then you get blasted when the vocalist really starts singing. So we definitely still need to be using compressors. Maybe we don't need to slam something. The days of slamming something through a 1176 with all 4 buttons in, maybe we're beyond the need to do those kinds of compressions, because we're not looking for the vocal to cut through -7 LUFS instrumentals. We're not we don't need that sort of cut anymore. That sort of cut in an Atmos mix would almost be too much. So we do need to compress, but we don't need to be so aggressive with the EQ and the kind of things we grew up learning about, like I keep saying, 1176s or LA2As, like really smashing into these things. Maybe we could take it easy, and then if we need more compression, we can always apply those things at the mix stage. The other thing is a lot of people use print effects into their stems, like a guitar. They'll print, a stereo mono reverb and some stereo delays and stuff. I would try to keep these things as separate as possible, like maybe record the guitar, keep it dry, and then record your effects separate, so that those can be applied independently of one another in the mix. Or even keep there are plugins in which take stereo things and make them immersive, like Nugent's Halo. And then if you have the original source guitar that's untreated, you could have that as a mono point in the room, and then you could have all the effects that you're applying be immersive. So just not being so quick to consolidate effects is another big thing.
I think that's really good advice, and this is really interesting to see this new technology and see what's going to happen with it and how we're all going to learn to adapt to it. It's pretty exciting.
I don't know if you can sense the excitement in my voice, but I've been this excited. I'm about a year and a half into the journey, of Atmos, and whether it be building the whole thing or learning. It's a constantly evolving at a crazy pace. What technologies are available, what new workflows are available. It's hard to keep up with the new Avid thing that Avid releases, the new thing that Pro Tools and Dolby are doing, all these things. It's like, but I'm definitely passionate about it enough to keep up and to try to want to be on the forefront of it, not only for myself and my own business, but also just to be helpful to bring others along the way. Because I do feel this is like the beginning of the future. It's the beginning of the way things are going to be. I just wanted to make full use of it as soon as possible.
Are there licensing requirements for this? Is this going to be another expense for setting up Atmos?
Yes, there are some expenses. Currently, I believe you need Pro Tools Ultimate, which is the kind of most expensive version of Pro Tools. It's not cheap. I think it's an $800 license for the first year, and then something like $400 thereafter. So that's not cheap. And then the Dolby Renderer software and plugin suite and all that stuff is another expense. And I think I spent on my first set of stuff, which was the production suite, I think it was $1,000. So it's not the cheapest thing in the world to get into. Previous technologies that we've had to get into in terms of licensing, I mean, we would pay 30 grand. Like, I remember wanting, the name of the company is escaping me. They used to do like the finest noise reduction. Their noise reduction software was $30,000. It's like, or DSD, all these things, hi-fi. It was just very expensive to get into, and this is definitely a fraction of that in terms of licensing. Of course, speakers are expensive, Avid matrices are expensive. There is a lot of expense to it, but really for the people producing music, all you really need is the renderer and a set of headphones just to start working in binaural, start playing around with it, start putting things in space, and then working on your productions with spatial in mind. And then when you start to get towards the end of the end of the project, come over to a place like mine, and we can fine tune it together. So it's not like every producer needs to spend $100 grand to get into spatial audio. Really, it's just some licenses on a computer to get started, and watch the Dolby videos, and you're good to go.
Yeah, that's very encouraging. You've got me excited about it now.
Hey, good.
Yeah, your enthusiasm for it really comes through, Dale.
Oh, thank you very much, Doug. The only thing I would ask is, I do need a 128 channel version of your VT7 shipped here next week. But other than that, I think I'm good to go.
I've been talking with mastering engineer and Dolby Atmos expert Dale Becker. I hope you found this episode helpful and enlightening. I certainly learned a lot from Dale. Please suggest this podcast to anyone you know who might find it interesting. This is the 50th episode of my take on music recording. It hardly seems possible that I have produced that many in just 15 months. There are more episodes in the works, which I hope you will find useful. Please let me know if you have any topics you would like me to cover. You can reach me at dwfern@dwfern.com. And please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. This is my take on music recording. I'm Doug Fern. See you next time.